The phone pressed cold against my ear as my daughter's voice turned unfamiliar. Mom, we're flying to Europe tomorrow. I already sold your beach house and your truck, we needed the money. If you've ever had the ground shift under your feet without the world making a sound, stay with me. Like the story, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who needs a reminder that love and boundaries can coexist, and tell me in the comments, what would you have said if it were your child on the line? I'm Brooks, 71 years old, a widow for 6 months, and until that moment convinced I knew my daughter. The waiting room around me hummed with quiet grief. Vending machine hum, paper masks, a soft chorus of coughs. The green plastic chair under me squeaked when I shifted. Across the aisle, a young father bounced a baby with the rhythm of a man bargaining with the universe. I should have cried. Instead, something steadier settled inside me like a bell finally finding its note. Because 3 days before Robert, my husband of 45 years, put his coffee down and never lifted it again, he pressed a manila envelope into my hands and said, "Put this away. If something happens to me, open it when you're ready." I hadn't been ready. Not then. Not through the casseroles and condolence cards, not through the aching quiet of our kitchen at dawn. But as hung up, as her goodbye clipped the air like a door closing on a drafty night, readiness arrived as a kind of mercy. The nurse called my name. My body, the doctor said later, was stubbornly healthy, a phrase that felt like a small, private victory. I nodded and smiled while my mind walked home without me, straight to the top drawer of the dresser where the envelope slept like a secret-keeping watch. When grief first moves in, it rearranges the furniture of your life. For months I had lived between shadows. The cup Robert used each morning, mouth of ceramic still ringed by memory, his blue work shirt, washed and folded, refusing to lose his scent, the dent in our couch cushions shaped like the weight of a man who read the paper slowly and kissed my forehead before the weather report. Came often, 3 times a week at first. She carried me through the heavy parts, or I thought she did. "You need to take better care of yourself now that you're alone," she'd say, eyes bright as a sunrise I didn't trust yet. She helped with the funeral, showed up with neat lists and sharper edges. She tightened our life into something manageable. I mistook efficiency for love. Our summers had been written in salt and sunlight. We bought the beach house when was 15, peeling paint, soft floorboards, a porch stitched to the ocean's breath. Every August, birthdays and barbecue smoke floated up into a ceiling fan that grumbled like an old uncle with stories to tell. Later, she brought boyfriends, then the man she married, Edward. I cooked for them all, watched towels dry like flags of an easy empire. The Ford pickup had been Robert's other heartbeat. He hand-washed its stubborn corners every Sunday, turned the oil change into ritual. He'd pat the fender, call it Old Faithful, park it under the same tree where the late light pooled like honey. Some things are just metal. Some things become a way you remember how a life sounded. So when said she'd sold both, the house that kept our memories and the truck that still carried the weight of his cologne, I discovered a silence that didn't feel empty. It felt deliberate, like the pause a violinist takes before drawing the first true note. The bus windows flickered with the city's moving picture. Laundromats turning shirts into prayers, storefronts blinking open and meaning we're trying, strangers pocketing their own storms. My fingers held the strap of my purse the way a climber holds a ledge. Somewhere between the drugstore and the park, I started smiling. Not out of joy, not out of madness, out of recognition. Robert planned for everything. He was a bus driver with a mathematician's mind, a saver, a quiet gambler who only bet on time. He'd fold future into small, ordinary days and leave it there to rise. When I reached our bedroom, late sun leaned across the dresser like an old friend. I opened the drawer. The envelope waited, solid, patient, addressed in his tidy hand. For I sat on the bed we'd shared through colds and holidays, arguments that faded into forgiveness, dawns that tasted like toast. The paper rasped as I slid the flap open. Inside, deeds, certificates, signatures holding hands across years. A letter, too, the kind written by someone who knows time is short and love is long. "My dear," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm where the coffee's always hot and the radios only play your laugh. Forgive me for the secrecy. I didn't want money to crowd our table or change our daughter's face when she looked at us. Over the years, I invested what we could spare: houses, a small motel, a downtown condo, shares too. There's a company I formed to hold it all. On paper, you're the sole owner. In truth, you always were." I read it twice, then a third time, the way you trace a shoreline you've walked for decades and discover a new curve. There in black ink, the apartment building where and Edward lived, the small motel 2 towns over, the condo perched above a street that never slept. My breath came like the tide, pulled back, pushed forward, smoothed out. I put the papers back carefully, set the letter on my lap, and listened to the house. Houses have a way of answering if you let them. The refrigerator hummed the same note it had hummed for 20 years. The floorboard near the hall still declared itself with a soft complaint. In the window, a moth practiced yearning against the glass. Nothing had changed, everything had. When grief breaks you, it leaves a seam. Some people hide the seam, some stitch along it with gold. I didn't know which kind of woman I was yet, but I knew I wasn't a victim, not of death, not of my daughter's sudden coldness. not of the small, calculating voice I'd begun to hear in Edward's laugh months earlier when he said Europe the way a magician says abracadabra. I made tea loose leaves the color of wet earth and poured it into the cup with the tiny chip on the rim. Robert said chips gave cups personality. I carried it to the kitchen table, lay out the documents like a map, and did what widows do when no one is watching, I decided. No courts, not yet. No loud confrontations in hallways that smelled like old arguments. Not for a woman who had learned that the truest power is often the quietest. Instead, order, patience. A conversation with Mr. the attorney who'd shaken my hand at the funeral and tucked a card into my palm the way a pastor folds a blessing into yours before you turn to go. I slept that night, really slept, the kind of sleep that lets the world rebuild itself behind your eyelids. In the morning, I put on the wine-colored dress Robert loved, the one he said made me look like I'd been poured into the evening. I pinned my hair, pressed a kiss to the truck keys I no longer had, and walked out into a day that didn't know it was about to become a story. The city had already started without me. Pigeons held committee on the library steps. A boy dragged a trumpet case like a small, stubborn dog. A bakery cough laughed steam into winter air. I rode the bus downtown, the envelope tucked into my bag, my heart settling into a calm I hadn't felt since the morning a kiss on my forehead became the last sentence of a life. I thought about my only child, my softest ache, and how love can make you clumsy, how grief can make you blind. I thought about the beach house and the way the porch boards creaked like laughter, about the truck and the tree that shaded it at dusk. I thought about the difference between losing something and having it taken from you. Then I thought about a building, 20 stories of brushed steel and glass, where my daughter lived on the 8th floor beneath a ceiling fan that whispered to itself at night. A building that, according to the papers in my bag, had my name tucked quietly into its bones. When the bus hissed at my stop, I stood on legs that remembered dancing and mourning and kneeling to pick up a dropped spoon. I walked the last block to Mistress' office, where floors remembered other women who had stood where I stood, women who had learned again and again that the world can be both cruel and kind, often in the same afternoon. I placed the envelope on his desk. "I'd like to speak softly," I said, "and carry a very large key." He smiled the way men smile when they don't yet understand they're in the presence of a storm that has learned patience. "Let's begin," he said. So we did. The next morning arrived with the kind of silence that makes a house feel like it's holding its breath. Sunlight slipped across my kitchen table, landing on Robert's old coffee mug, the one with the fatting blue line around the rim. It was almost poetic, how a life can look unchanged while everything inside it has quietly begun to rot. Before we continue, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if you've ever had to smile through heartbreak. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your own child sold everything you loved? Didn't call for a week, not a single text, not a polite "how are you, mom?" Nothing. At first, I told myself she was busy, that she was preparing for her trip, maybe even feeling guilty. But guilt has a sound and silence isn't it? By the 8th day, I had learned the sound of her indifference. It was the hollow echo of my phone ringing for someone who no longer cared to answer. I began noticing things I had ignored before. The way she had started dressing differently, luxury handbags, a new diamond bracelet she claimed was a business gift. Edward had been whispering about investments and opportunities for months. Each time I asked what kind, he'd flash that smug grin and say, "You wouldn't understand, it's all digital now." He never called me mom, not once. One evening, I sat by the window, watching the streetlights blink awake like tired sentinels. That's when my neighbor Aurora dropped by. She was my oldest friend, the kind who remembered what your wedding cake looked like. She brought pie, as she always did when something heavy hung in the air. "I saw an Edward last night," she said softly, slicing through the crust. "They were at that restaurant downtown, looked celebratory." "Celebratory," I repeated. Had a glass of champagne. Edward was waving some papers around, they looked like contracts or something. The taste of cinnamon turned bitter in my mouth. So it was true, they had already sold the house, our beach house, and were celebrating their little victory while I was here sipping tea with ghosts. "Maybe it's for the best," Aurora said cautiously. "You're alone now, you could move somewhere smaller, start fresh." I nodded, even smiled. But inside me something ancient shifted, a cold patience, the kind that belongs to people who've been underestimated too many times. That night, I took the envelope from my drawer again and spread the documents out like a tarot reading. The list of properties, the accounts, the company name, Robert Holdings. My name printed neatly as the sole beneficiary. It was almost ironic. Thought she had stripped me bare, yet she was living, quite literally, inside one of my own buildings. A strange clarity bloomed in me. Revenge wasn't what I wanted. Justice wasn't enough. What I wanted was for her to see, really see, the cost of greed. But to do that, I couldn't confront her with anger. I had to play the part she expected, the frail old mother too weak to fight back. The next morning, I called Mr. the lawyer Robert had trusted for decades. His voice was warm, the way people sound when they still believe in kindness. "Mrs. Brooks, I've been waiting for your call," he said. "Robert told me you might need me one day." That made me pause. He did. "Yes," he said, "you were stronger than you thought, but that sometimes strength needs structure." We met that afternoon. His office smelled of old books and lemon polish. As I handed him the documents, I noticed his eyebrows lift, not in confusion but in admiration. "Mrs. Brooks, this is quite an estate," he murmured. I corrected, "until my daughter sold what she had no right to." "Ah, so that's what this is about." He read Robert's letter carefully, tracing the neat cursive with a lawyer's patience. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Your husband was very thorough. Every investment was placed under this company, and you, Mrs. Brooks, are the sole owner. That means your daughter's sale of the beach house was fraudulent. We can reverse it." I looked him in the eyes. "Can we do it quietly?" He hesitated. "Quietly. Yes, I don't want her to know, not yet." Mr. smiled faintly, not the condescending smile of a man humoring a widow, but the knowing one of someone who understood the value of patience. "As you wish," he said, "we'll move carefully." Walking home that day, I passed a jewelry store. In the display window sat a necklace made of small, delicate pearls, the kind Robert would have bought me on our anniversary. I caught my reflection in the glass, hair neatly pinned, eyes sharper than I remembered, a faint, dangerous smile forming. That night, I sat at the table again with my tea and wrote one sentence on a blank page. "She thinks I am weak. That will be her first mistake." The next day, Aurora came by again, her usual concern etched into every line of her face. "I heard and Edward already left for Europe," she said. "Are you okay?" I smiled, "Better than I've been in a long time." She frowned, confused. "You're not upset?" "Upset?" I said softly. "No, dear, I'm preparing." That night, as I lay in bed, Robert's words echoed in my head, "You'll know what to do when the time comes." And I did. Tomorrow, I'd start the process with Mr. Thought she had stolen my peace. But she had, without realizing, handed me something far more valuable, a purpose. I woke before sunrise the next day, the kind of morning where the air feels too still, as if the world itself is waiting to see what you'll do next. The clock on Robert's side of the bed blinked 5:17, frozen in a soft orange glow. For months after he died, I couldn't look at that clock without crying. Now I looked at it and felt something else, steadiness. If you've ever had to question whether forgiveness makes you weak or wise, stay with me. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story because sometimes strength doesn't roar, it whispers. I made coffee, the way Robert used to, one scoop too strong, just the way he liked it. As it brewed, the aroma filled the house, wrapping around me like memory itself. I stood there, fingers tapping the counter, wondering if I was doing the right thing. Because beneath the anger, beneath the humiliation of being discarded, there was still love, the stubborn kind that doesn't die even when it should. Was my daughter my only child? I had carried her, held her through fevers, stayed up through her heartbreaks. How could the same little girl who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares grow into a woman who would sell my home and car without a tear? It's strange how betrayal doesn't always shatter you instantly. Sometimes it dissolves you slowly, like sugar in warm water, until one day you realize there's nothing left but bitterness. I went to the beach house once more, not as an owner, not even as a mother, just as a woman saying goodbye. The front steps creaked under my shoes, just as they had every summer morning when Robert would whistle and call me out to see the sunrise. The new owners had placed potted plants on the porch, cheap ones, plastic even. That's how you know when someone doesn't love a place. They decorate it for appearance, not memory. Standing there, I saw flashes of it 15, hair tangled with salt, laughing as she chased the tide. She used to collect shells and line them along the window sills, swearing each one held a secret wish. I wondered what her wish had been. Maybe it was to escape. Maybe it was to become someone her mother could never recognize. The thought made me ache in a way words couldn't reach. On my way home, I passed by the old truck yard. Robert's Ford wasn't there anymore, but I still stopped and stared at the empty space where it had once been parked. I could almost see him there, rag in hand, humming, the late light catching in his silver hair. He loved that truck more than anything we owned, not because of what it was, but because of what it represented: care, pride, responsibility. All the things had forgotten. When I returned home, the house greeted me with its familiar quiet, not lonely, just honest. I placed Robert's photograph on the table and spoke softly to it. "Tell me if I'm doing the right thing," I whispered. "Tell me how to love her and still teach her." But photographs don't answer. They only remind you of the way someone used to look when the world made sense. The next few days blurred together in a rhythm of planning and pretending. Mr. called regularly to update me, discreet, patient, efficient. He had started the process of reclaiming the beach house and freezing the fraudulent transactions. "Everything is moving along quietly," he assured me. "Within a few weeks, you'll have complete control again." I thanked him, then hung up, feeling that strange duality again, power and sorrow, side by side. Because revenge is never as clean as you think it'll be. Even when you win, you bleed a little. At night, I found myself replaying memories like old tapes. His first day of school, her prom night, her wedding. I remembered the way she used to rest her head on my shoulder after crying over exams. And then her cold, distant voice on the phone, "We needed the money, bye." Was I about to destroy my daughter to teach her a lesson? Or was I about to save her in the only way left? I didn't have the answer yet. But I knew this: the woman who once begged the world to be kind was gone. In her place stood someone who had learned that kindness without boundaries is self-destruction. The following morning, Aurora came by again. She was carrying her knitting bag, pretending it was just a casual visit. But I could tell by the tightness in her eyes that she had come to ask the question everyone was whispering about. She said, setting her bag down, "I don't mean to pry, but are you sure you're all right?" "Of course," I said with a small smile. "Why wouldn't I be?" "Well," she hesitated, "people talk. They say left you with nothing, that she and Edward took advantage of you." I laughed softly. "People always talk, Aurora. It gives them something to do while they avoid their own pain." She sighed. "I just don't want you to be alone." "Don't worry," I said, pouring her tea. "I'm not alone. Robert made sure of that." Aurora didn't understand the double meaning in my words, not yet. That evening, I took out a notebook and began to write. Not a letter, not a plan, something in between. Lesson 1, a mother's love should heal, not enable. Lesson 2, some people must lose what they have to value what they had. Lesson 3, forgiveness is not forgetting, it's choosing peace over poison. As the words took shape, my hands stopped trembling. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt him again, not beside me but within me. The calm, strategic mind, the quiet resilience, the belief that people learn best from the consequences they create. Outside, the night was heavy with rain. Each drop against the window felt like punctuation to the story I was writing, one that wasn't over yet. Because soon, this perfect European dream would start to crumble. Edward's charm would turn to debt, and her arrogance would meet its first mirror. And when that happened, she'd come running back, not for love but for help. And that's when my lesson would begin. 3 weeks passed before the phone rang again. It was a Friday morning, gray and damp, the kind of day when even the sunlight seems hesitant. The kettle was whistling, the mail lay unopened, and I was learning to enjoy the quiet when the shrill sound cut through the house like a blade. His name blinked on the screen. I hesitated for a full 5 seconds before answering. "Mom," she said, her voice lighter than I remembered, almost cheerful. "How are you?" I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "I'm fine, darling. How's Europe?" "Oh, we haven't left yet. I wanted to let you know we sold the house and the truck. We got a great deal and—" Her voice faltered just a little. "We transferred your share into your account, 30%. We wanted to be fair." Fair, the word echoed in my mind, twisting into something almost comical. They had taken everything, every memory, every trace of Robert's life, and left me scraps dressed up as generosity. But I kept my tone calm. That was thoughtful. "I knew you understand," she said brightly. "Edward found a great investment opportunity overseas. This trip could change our lives." "Yes," I said quietly, "I'm sure it will." After she hung up, I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand. And then, for the first time in months, I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind that comes from disbelief so deep it becomes absurd. She had stolen my home, sold Robert's truck, and dared to call it fair. I should have been furious, but instead I felt something sharper: clarity. Because now her greed had drawn the line in ink. And I finally knew what had to be done. That afternoon, I met with Mr. again. He looked up as I entered, eyes kind but cautious. "Mrs. Brooks, I have good news. The sale of the beach house can be reversed. It was illegal. Your daughter had no authority to sell property you solely owned." I exhaled slowly, relief mixing with something almost like satisfaction. And the truck. That may be trickier, he said. She had temporary power of attorney after your husband's death. We might need to prove deception. Then let's prove it, I said, quietly. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. I see, you want to do this your way. Yes, mister, I said, standing than I had in years. My way. That night, I pulled out the dusty box of old photographs from the attic. As a baby, grinning with frosting on her cheeks. Robert holding her at the beach, sunburned and proud. Family picnics, birthdays, Christmas mornings, all moments that now felt like postcards from another life. I traced my fingers over smiling face in one photo and whispered, I hope one day you look at yourself the way I look at you now, and understand what love without respect can destroy. Days turned into weeks. Europe looked good on social media, at least that's what the photos said. And Edward standing in front of the tower, holding champagne glasses. Her captions were all smiles and gratitude, new beginnings with my love. Hard work pays off. People commented heart emojis. No one saw the trail of broken trust she'd left behind. But what the world didn't know was that, quietly, everything she stood on was shifting beneath her feet. Mister's team had successfully reclaimed the beach house, returning it to my name. The apartment building paperwork was moving faster than expected. And each day, my control grew, not just over my assets, but over the story itself. I kept up appearances. To the neighbors, I was still the poor widow trying to move on. To the grocery clerk, I was the polite old lady who counted coupons and smiled through loneliness. But behind closed doors, I was building something meticulous, a lesson, wrapped in silence and waiting for the right moment to unfold. Had called twice more before leaving for Europe. Both times her tone was syrupy sweet, rehearsed. She ended each call with, I love you, Mom, as if those words could erase what she'd done. But I could hear the lie behind them, love doesn't sound like manipulation. When they finally boarded the plane, I knew it wasn't goodbye. It was the beginning of their undoing. One evening, as I sat by the window watching rain carve lines down the glass, Aurora came by again. She brought soup this time, chicken, her way of showing worry. Have you heard from, she asked. She's in Europe, I replied, living her dream. Aurora frowned, you don't sound happy for her. I'm happy, I said softly, just not the kind of happy she'd understand. That night, I dreamed of Robert. He was sitting in his old chair, newspaper folded neatly on his lap, his glasses perched low on his nose. When he looked up, his smile was calm but knowing. It's time, he said, teach her what we taught each other through work, through loss, through love. I woke up with tears on my pillow and a strength I hadn't felt in years. The next morning, I called Mr. Start the next process, I told him. I want the apartment building under my full name, not the company, and make sure no one knows. He paused, including your daughter. Especially my daughter. The first lesson was done. She thought she'd taken everything from me. The second lesson would show her she never even knew what I truly had. 2 weeks later, Aurora came rushing over with gossip hot off the neighborhood vine. Did you hear? Edward's in trouble with the bank. Apparently, he used your daughter's apartment as collateral for some kind of loan. I smiled faintly, stirring my tea. Is that so? Yes, the bank's investigating him for fraud. How unfortunate, I said, though the calm in my voice wasn't sympathy, it was inevitability. The cracks were forming. Europe wasn't a dream anymore. It was a ticking clock. And soon would realize that the only safe place left in the world was the home she'd tried to sell. 3 weeks after an Edward's glorious European departure, the silence around me felt different. Not the calm silence of peace, but the kind that waits, thick with anticipation. I could almost hear it breathing, whispering that something was about to crack. If you've ever felt that strange, aching mix of love and justice, when your heart breaks for someone you also want to see learn their lesson, this part is for you. Before we dive deeper, remember to like, subscribe, and comment below. Would you forgive someone who betrayed you if they came back broken? It started with a phone call from Aurora one rainy evening. She never wasted words. She said, her voice sharp with urgency, have you heard the news? No, what happened? Edward, the bank froze his accounts. Rumor is he's drowning in debt and the apartment they used as collateral doesn't even belong to him. Can you believe it? I could. I thanked her, hung up, and stared out the window, where lightning carved brief truths into the dark. It had begun. The same building my daughter had treated like her trophy, the one she flaunted on social media as their home, was legally mine. Every time she posted another photo from some luxury cafe in Paris, I imagined the letters from the bank piling up at her door. Every action has an echo, and hers were coming home. A week later, Mr. confirmed it. "Mrs. Brooks," he said over the phone, "it's official. You now have full control of all your properties, including the apartment building where your daughter lives." My hands trembled slightly, not from triumph, but from the enormity of it all. I thought I'd feel victorious, but instead I felt hollow. Because beneath all of this strategy and planning, I was still a mother. And mothers, even when betrayed, don't celebrate their children's downfall. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain outside played its slow rhythm against the roof, and I sat by the window clutching Robert's letter. His words came alive in the candlelight. "If something happens to me, remember, kindness and wisdom are stronger than anger. Use them both." I sighed. "Oh, Robert," I whispered, "you always believed I could be both kind and strong. But how do I stay kind when my heart feels carved out?" Days later, Aurora appeared again, half breathless with fresh gossip. "Edward's disappeared," she said, her eyes wide. "Apparently he left behind in Europe. Some say he ran off with another woman." I closed my eyes. The picture was complete. Proud, confident, cruel, was now alone in a foreign country, abandoned by the man she had thrown her entire life behind. There was a strange poetry in it, not joy, not satisfaction, but something that felt like truth returning home. I didn't have to wait long. One gray morning the phone rang again, that same sharp tone I once dreaded. "Mom," the voice on the other end was small, broken, unrecognizable. "Mom, I need help." My grip on the phone tightened. "Oh no." Her breath hitched. "Edward's gone. He left me, took everything. The accounts are empty. I have nowhere to go." There it was, the moment every wounded mother both fears and expects, when the child who pushed you away finally realizes the world is not kind. "I see," I said softly. "Where are you now?" "At the airport. I just landed. Can I come home?" Home, the same word she had spat out like poison weeks ago. And now it trembled from her lips like a prayer. "Of course," I said, my voice calm. "Come home." When I hung up, my reflection in the kitchen window startled me. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a woman who had just been handed the power to change everything, not through revenge, but through restraint. I poured myself tea, the same way Robert used to make it, with honey, not sugar. Sweet but slow. Because what was about to happen couldn't be rushed. Arrived the next afternoon. When I opened the door, I barely recognized her. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her hair tangled, her face pale and swollen from crying. For a moment, I saw not the cold woman who had betrayed me, but the frightened child she once was. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I'm sorry." I didn't move toward her. Instead, I stepped aside and said, "Come in." She entered quietly, eyes darting around as if expecting judgment to leap from the walls. The house hadn't changed. Same couch, same photos, same faint smell of lavender and lemon cleaner. But I had changed, and she could feel it. We sat in silence for several minutes before she spoke again. "Edward, he lied about everything. The business, the money, all of it. He used me, Mom." Her voice cracked on the last word. "He took everything." I studied her face. For the first time in years, she wasn't performing. No forced charm, no shallow excuses, just pain. I said slowly, "I told you once that love without respect turns into manipulation. You didn't listen." "I know," she whispered. "I was stupid. I just wanted to build something of my own. I thought he was helping me." "You thought wrong." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I don't have money. I don't have a home. I have nowhere to go. Please, Mom, just let me stay here for a while." For a moment, I wanted to refuse, to let her feel the weight of every choice she'd made. But Robert's voice echoed again in my mind. "Kindness and wisdom, use them both." "Of course, honey," I said softly. "You'll always have a place here." Collapsed into my arms, sobbing. And as I held her, I felt the contradiction tear through me, love and resentment, pity and power, mercy and memory. That night after she fell asleep in her old bedroom, I stood at her door for a long time. She looked peaceful, fragile, like the little girl who used to dream of growing up and traveling the world. I wanted to believe she had changed. But I also knew better. Change doesn't happen overnight. And sometimes, before healing begins, a person has to understand what losing everything truly means. I closed her door quietly and went to my study. There on my desk was the second envelope Robert had left me. I hadn't opened it before, but something told me tonight was the night. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. It was short. If our daughter ever loses her way, there's a key in this envelope. It opens the box that will help you help her, but use it only when she's ready. Inside was a small silver key, cool and heavy in my hand. I looked toward the closed door down the hallway where my daughter slept. Was she ready? Not yet, but soon. The next morning I woke before dawn. The house was still, except for the faint sound of breathing down the hall, slow, uneven, like a child fighting nightmares. The silver key sat on my nightstand, catching the pale light of sunrise. I turned it between my fingers, feeling its weight, small yet heavy with meaning. If you've ever held something that could change everything, a secret, a choice, a key, stay with me. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Would you open the box or wait until they earned your trust again? I made coffee quietly, the aroma filling the air as I stared out the kitchen window. A new day had come, but the past wasn't done speaking. Was still asleep, wrapped in blankets she didn't deserve but still needed. I watched her from the doorway for a moment, messy hair, tear-stained face, clinging to the comfort she once abandoned. Robert had left me 2 envelopes. The first had saved me. The second, I now understood, was meant to save her. But first, I needed to find the box the key belonged to. I searched through every drawer, every cabinet, every shelf. Nothing. The key was old-fashioned, not for a door, but for something smaller, personal. I tried the attic next. Dust hung thick in the air, sunlight slicing through it like memory itself. There, beneath a faded quilt, I found an old cedar chest, one Robert had once told me belonged to his grandfather. I hadn't opened it in years. When I pressed the key into the lock, it fit perfectly. Inside was a stack of documents tied together with twine, and a sealed letter addressed to me, written in Robert's neat, careful handwriting. My dearest, if you found this, it means has come home, and not in joy but in regret. Inside this chest are the records, deeds, and funds meant for her future. I set them aside years ago, not as inheritance, but as a lesson to be given when she truly understands the value of what she lost. When that time comes, you'll know. Until then, guide her quietly as you always have guided me. With love, always, Robert. My throat tightened as I read his words. He had known somehow, even before he was gone, he had seen the path ahead. He had trusted me with not just our future, but hers. Beneath the letter were several thick folders. Legal titles, small stock portfolios, and a bank ledger, all in his name, all untouched. Robert hadn't just built a safety net, he'd built redemption. For a long moment, I sat on the attic floor, surrounded by everything my husband had quietly prepared. I thought of her arrogance, her betrayal, her fall. And then I thought of the little girl who used to hold my hand on stormy nights, whispering, "Mom, promise me nothing bad will ever happen to us." I had kept that promise for years. But sometimes, to keep a promise, you have to let someone face their bad days alone. I carefully closed the chest, locking it again. The time hadn't come yet. She needed to rebuild something inside herself before she could receive what her father had built for her. When I came downstairs, was in the kitchen, wearing one of Robert's old sweaters. It hung off her shoulders, a reminder of how small she still was in some ways. "Morning," she murmured, not meeting my eyes. "Morning," I replied, pouring her coffee. She wrapped her hands around the mug like it was an anchor. "Thank you for letting me stay," she said quietly. "You're my daughter," I replied. "You don't need to thank me for that." She hesitated, then added, "I applied for a job at the downtown, just part-time. I need to start fixing things." That caught me off guard. "That's good," I said slowly. "Work can be healing." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I know I hurt you, Mom and Dad. I don't even know who I became, but I want to be better." There was sincerity in her voice, fragile but real. Still, I didn't tell her about the chest upstairs. Not yet. Over the next few weeks, I watched her quietly. She woke early, went to work, came home tired but steady. The arrogance that once clung to her was gone, stripped away by loss. Instead, there was humility and gratitude. She started cooking dinner again, badly at first, burning the soup and oversalting the pasta, but trying nonetheless. Every time she apologized, I smiled and told her it was fine. And for the first time in years, we began talking again, really talking. She told me about her mistakes. How Edward had promised her the world, then slowly isolated her, convincing her to use my assets as investments. How he'd called her names made her feel small, then disappeared the moment the money ran dry. By the time she finished, she was crying. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just an ache deep in my chest, the kind that only mothers know. One night, as we washed dishes side by side, turned to me and said, "Mom, how did you forgive Dad when he used to hurt you?" I paused. "Robert never hurt me, not in that way." She shook her head. "I don't mean physically, I mean when he disappointed you, when he forgot things, when he failed." I smiled softly, because I knew he was trying. That's all forgiveness really needs, the effort to be better. She stared down at her hands, silent for a long moment. "I'm trying too," she whispered. And in that instant, I knew she was finally ready to learn the truth. That night after she went to bed, I went back to the attic and unlocked the chest. I placed Robert's letter on top of the papers, right where she would see it first. Then I carried the box downstairs and set it on the kitchen table. When morning came, would find it waiting for her, not as a gift, but as a mirror. Because some lessons aren't taught. They're inherited. The house was quiet when I woke, sunlight slipping through the curtains like soft gold ribbons. For a moment, I forgot what day it was, until I saw the cedar chest sitting on the kitchen table, patient and purposeful. It almost seemed alive in the morning light, like a messenger waiting to speak. If you've ever had to show someone the truth, not through anger but through revelation, then you'll understand what came next. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story. Tell me in the comments, would you show them mercy or let the truth do the teaching? I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, uncertain, like she already sensed something was different. She entered the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes, hair tangled, still wearing one of Robert's old shirts. Her gaze landed on the chest immediately. "What's that?" she asked. I looked up from my tea. "Your father left it for you." She froze. "For me?" "Yes," I said quietly, "but only when I felt you were ready." She blinked at me, then at the chest. "What's inside?" I nodded toward the key sitting beside it. "Why don't you find out?" She hesitated before picking up the key, as if afraid of what it might unlock. Her hands trembled slightly as she slid it into the lock. The mechanism turned with a soft click. When she lifted the lid, the scent of cedar and old paper filled the room. Inside, the documents lay neatly stacked, the top one labeled Brooks Holdings. Her brows furrowed. "Mom, what is this?" "Your father started saving for you long before you knew what money even was," I said. "He built investments, properties, accounts, all in your name. Everything you ever wanted was already waiting for you, you just couldn't see it." She looked stunned. "These are mine." "They were meant to be," I replied softly, "but only when you understood what they meant." She reached for the letter on top and unfolded it slowly. I watched her eyes move across Robert's handwriting, his familiar loops and curves, the same ones that had written me love notes decades ago. When she finished reading, her hands dropped to her lap. Tears spilled down her cheeks, silent and heavy. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew I'd mess up." "No," I said. "He knew you'd need to find your way back." Her shoulders began to shake. "I don't deserve this, not after what I did to you, to him." "You don't," I agreed gently. "But that's the thing about love, it gives you what you haven't earned yet, so you have something to grow into." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the ticking clock and the quiet rhythm of her sobs. Finally, she looked up at me, her face blotchy and raw. "I thought I was being smart," she said. "Edward told me you were too old-fashioned, that you didn't know how money worked. He said we'd double the profits and that you'd thank me later." I sighed. "And did he?" She shook her head. "He took everything, left me stranded in another country. I was so stupid." "No," I said softly. "You were, and greedy. Those two often wear the same clothes." She laughed through her tears. "That sounds like something Dad would say." It was, I smiled. He always believed lessons meant more when they were lived, not lectured. Spent hours going through the papers, her expression shifting between awe, guilt, and disbelief. "These properties, they're all still ours." "Yes," I said. "Robert made sure of it. I reclaimed them quietly while you were away." She blinked. "You did all that alone?" "I had help," I said with a small smile. "Your father prepared everything, I just followed his map." She leaned back in her chair, eyes glistening. "All this time I thought I was smarter than both of you. I thought I was fixing things when I was the one breaking them." "Sometimes," I said, "you have to lose everything to learn how to hold anything." The next morning, she asked if she could visit the beach house. I hesitated, then nodded. We drove in silence, the road winding through familiar hills and memories. When we arrived, she stood at the gate for a long time, staring at the porch she'd once sold without a second thought. The ocean air smelled the same: salt, wind, and forgiveness. She walked slowly up the steps, running her fingers along the railing. "I can't believe you got it back." "I never lost it," I said simply. "I just waited for the right time to return it to the family it belonged to." She turned to me, eyes filled with tears again. "I ruined so much." I reached out, brushing her hair from her face, then start rebuilding. We spent the day cleaning, sweeping sand, airing out rooms, scrubbing old windows until the light came through again. It felt symbolic somehow, like washing the past clean. By evening, sat on the porch steps, staring out at the sea. "I don't think I'll ever be able to forgive myself," she said quietly. "That's all right," I replied. "Forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened, it's about learning to live with it without letting it define you." She nodded slowly, then leaned her head on my shoulder, the way she used to when she was small. And for the first time in years, we watched the sun set together, not as strangers, but as mother and daughter again. That night before bed, she hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Mom, for not giving up on me." I smiled faintly. "I almost did, but then I remembered who raised you and who raised me. We don't give up easily." She laughed softly. "Dad would be proud of you." I looked toward the window, where moonlight spilled across the floor like a quiet blessing. "I hope he's proud of us," I said. When I went to bed, I left the chest open on the table, not as a secret, but as a reminder. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't wealth or property. It's wisdom. And Robert had left us plenty of both. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm I hadn't known in years. The kind of rhythm that feels like healing, slow, deliberate, but steady. And I fell into a quiet routine. Mornings filled with coffee and silence, afternoons spent tending the garden, and evenings where conversation crept back into the house like shy sunlight. If you've ever tried to rebuild something fragile, trust, family, or faith, you know it doesn't happen overnight. Before we go deeper, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this story, and tell me in the comments, if someone broke your trust, would you let them earn it back? One morning, I found sitting at the kitchen table, a notebook open in front of her. "What are you writing?" I asked. She looked up, cheeks flushed. "A plan. I want to pay you back, Mom, for everything: the house, the truck, the mess I made." Her voice cracked on the last few words, but her determination didn't. I walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "This isn't about repayment, it's about growth. Money can't fix what character has to rebuild." She nodded slowly, then sighed. "Still, I have to try. I can't keep being the woman who takes and never gives." That was the first time I truly saw change, not in her apologies, but in her actions. She started working longer hours on weekends, she volunteered at the local shelter, not because I told her to, but because she said she wanted to do something that wasn't about herself. Every time she came home exhausted, with flour on her apron and hope in her eyes, I saw pieces of the daughter I had lost slowly returning. But as she grew stronger, I felt something inside me unraveling quietly. Forgiving someone you love is like healing a deep wound. You stop the bleeding, but the scar still aches when the weather changes. And lately, my heart had been aching more than usual. One evening, I sat on the porch with Robert's photograph in my hand. The ocean wind carried the sound of distant laughter, light and unguarded. I smiled. "She's getting there, Robert," I whispered, "just like you said she would." Then the phone rang. It was Mrs. Brooks, he began, his voice careful. "I wanted to discuss something important. There's an offer for the apartment building, a very good one, but it requires your signature as the sole owner." I hesitated. "Is it wise to sell?" "It's profitable," he said, "but your daughter's name was listed in the secondary file from Robert's will. It seems he intended to eventually transfer ownership to her." I froze. Robert had planned to give her the building, the same one she had nearly lost through betrayal. "Do you want me to finalize the sale?" he asked. I stared out at the waves crashing beyond the porch. "No," I said finally, "not yet." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what forgiveness really meant. Was it enough to let her back into my home? Or did it mean trusting her again with something that truly mattered? By dawn, I had my answer. When woke up, she found me in the kitchen with coffee and two envelopes on the table, one labeled "for you," the other from him. "What's this?" she asked, still groggy. I pushed them toward her. "The first is from me, the second is from your father." She opened mine first. Inside was a handwritten note. "What? Forgiveness is not a gift I give. It's a door you choose to walk through. You've taken your first steps. Now it's time for the rest." I've decided to sign over the apartment building, the one you and Edward once called home. Not because you deserve it, but because I believe you've finally learned how to keep it. Mom. When she finished reading, she looked stunned. Mom, are you serious, after everything I did? I nodded, yes, because real trust has to be rebuilt with real responsibility. I'm not rewarding your mistakes, I'm giving you the chance to prove they changed you. She burst into tears, pressing the letter to her chest. I won't let you down again, she whispered. Then she opened the second envelope, Robert's. Inside was a simple line, written in his familiar hand. To our daughter, the world will test you, but if you remember where you came from, you'll never fail. Trace the words with trembling fingers, smiling through tears. He believed in me even when I didn't. He always did, I said softly. Weeks passed and she threw herself into managing the building, overseeing repairs, helping tenants, organizing small community events. For the first time, she wasn't chasing luxury or approval. She was building something real. One afternoon, she came home with a spark in her eyes. Mom, I met a family today, a single mother and her son. They were struggling, so I offered them one of the empty units rent-free for a month. I hope that's okay. I smiled. It's more than okay, that's exactly what your father would have done. She grinned. Maybe I'm finally learning from the right people. That night, as the sun melted into the horizon, I sat on the porch again, this time with beside me. We didn't talk much, we didn't need to. The air between us was quiet, not from distance, but from peace. I don't know if I can ever make up for the past, she said softly. You already have, I replied, not by forgetting it, but by living differently because of it. The waves rolled in, steady and forgiving. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the wound in my heart begin to truly close. When night fell, I looked up at the stars and whispered into the dark. She's home, Robert, really home. And in the whisper of the wind that followed, I could sworn I heard his voice reply. You did good, you both did. It's strange how peace sneaks up on you. Not in a grand moment, not with trumpets or fireworks, but quietly, like the tide washing away footprints you thought would last forever. That's how it felt in the months after took over the building. If you've ever forgiven someone so deeply it startled even you, you know it doesn't erase the past. It just stops the past from hurting every day. Before I tell you what happened next, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Do you believe forgiveness is freedom or just another kind of love? So life began to bloom again. I watched her find joy in the smallest things, in morning walks, in community meetings, in helping tenants fix a broken faucet or carry groceries up the stairs. The woman who once lived for status now lived for service. She stopped wearing designer clothes and started wearing purpose. It suited her. One Sunday morning, I went to visit her at the building. When she saw me walk through the doors, she smiled, not nervously, not with guilt, but with pride. Mom, you're here early, she said, leading me to the courtyard she'd transformed with flowers and benches. Children played nearby while tenants chatted over coffee. It's beautiful, I said, taking it all in. It's home, she replied, for everyone here. And then quietly she added, you were right, Mom, the best kind of wealth is the kind you share. In that moment, I felt something inside me loosen, a knot I hadn't even realized was still tied. I had spent so long carrying pain, guarding my heart like a fortress, believing it was the only way to protect myself. But forgiveness doesn't mean weakness. It means you finally stop letting what broke you decide how you live. That night I sat on the porch, looking at the same stars Robert and I had watched 1,000 times before. For the first time, I wasn't speaking to him with grief. I was speaking to him with gratitude. Robert, I whispered, you were right about her, she had to fall to see herself clearly, and maybe I had to too. The following week, something unexpected happened. Received a letter, an official one, sealed with a foreign stamp. She came to my house immediately, holding it with trembling hands. Mom, it's from France. My stomach turned cold. From Edward. She nodded. Do I open it? I studied her face, older now, calmer, wise in ways pain can only teach. Yes, I said, open it. She broke the seal carefully. Inside was a short, uneven letter. It read, "What? I was sentenced to 2 years for fraud. I've had time to think and I know I ruined your life. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say I'm sorry. You deserved better from me, from life. I hope you find peace. Edward." She folded the letter in silence, then placed it on the table. I feel nothing, she said finally. No anger, I asked. No, not even sadness, just nothing. I smiled softly. That's what peace feels like, darling. After that day, she didn't mention Edward again. It was as if he had been a storm that passed, leaving behind clearer skies. I too started letting go of things I didn't need anymore, old resentments, regrets, and fears that had lived rent-free in my heart for years. I donated Robert's old suits to charity, but I kept one, the gray one he wore on our anniversary, because love doesn't vanish, it just changes form. Sometimes at night, I'd sit in his chair by the window reading his letters. And for the first time, I could read them without crying. And I grew closer in ways we hadn't in decades. We share dinners, tell stories, even laugh about the chaos of our past. Once, while washing dishes, she turned to me and said, "Do you ever think Dad planned all this? Like somehow he knew we needed to fall apart before we could find each other again?" I chuckled, knowing your father, he probably did. She smiled, then I'm glad he did, because losing everything was the only way I learned what I really had. One afternoon, as I walked through the garden behind our home, I found sitting under the old oak tree. She was writing in a notebook again. "What are you working on now?" I asked. She smiled shyly. "A scholarship program for single mothers trying to get back on their feet. I want to name it after Dad." My chest filled with warmth. He'd be honored. "And you," she added. "You're the reason I learned what real love is. You didn't just forgive me, Mom, you rebuilt me." Tears filled my eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from pride. Later that evening, she brought out a small gift, a delicate silver locket. When I opened it, I saw two photos inside, one of Robert and one of us, the three of us smiling at the beach, long before life got complicated. "I had this made for you," she said softly. "So you always remember how far we've come." I clasped it around my neck, feeling its weight settle over my heart, not heavy but grounding. "Thank you," I whispered, "for coming back to me." She smiled. "Thank you for letting me." That night, as I sat on the porch watching the waves shimmer in the moonlight, I finally understood something Robert had written in one of his old letters. Love is not about holding on, it's about knowing when to open your hands. And that's what I had done. I had opened my hands, and in doing so, I got my daughter back. When came to sit beside me, she leaned her head on my shoulder, the same way she used to as a child. "Mom," she murmured, "you know what's strange?" "What's that?" I used to think strength was never needing anyone, but now I know real strength is loving someone even after they've broken your heart. I smiled at her, the locket glinting in the soft light. "That's the kind of strength your father always believed in." We sat there until the stars came out, two women who had lost everything, yet somehow found everything that truly mattered. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. Not forgiveness, not closure, not peace. I already had them all. They say time heals all wounds. But I've learned that time alone doesn't heal, truth does. And forgiveness is the medicine that keeps the truth from turning into poison. Before I tell you the final part of this story, take a moment to like, share, and comment below. Tell me, if you had to forgive someone who broke you, would you do it for them or for yourself? It's been a year since came back into my life, and the rhythm of our days feels like something sacred now. Not loud or dramatic, just gentle, consistent, like the soft hum of peace after a storm. Every morning, we share coffee on the porch that Robert built. Every evening, we walk along the shore, barefoot, listening to the waves. And sometimes, when the wind carries her laughter, I swear I can hear Robert laughing, too, carried somewhere between this world and the next. The woman who once saw me as an obstacle now sees me as her compass. And I, who once saw her betrayal as the end, now see it as the beginning of who we both became. This building is thriving. She's turned it into more than just apartments. It's a small community filled with love, kindness, and second chances. There's on the first floor now, run by one of the tenants she once helped. There's a tiny library she built with her own hands, filled with donated books and a plaque that reads, "Dedicated to Robert Brooks, who taught us that real wealth is love." When I saw it for the first time, I couldn't hold back tears. It wasn't just a tribute to her father, it was proof that she finally understood everything we'd tried to teach her. One afternoon, she came home from the building carrying a stack of papers. "Mom," she said, "I've been approved to expand the program. We're going to open a shelter for women and children in crisis, and I want to name it the Brooks Haven." I smiled. "That's beautiful." "It's all because of you," she said softly. "You could have punished me, you could have let me drown in my mistakes, but instead you taught me to swim." Her words filled my eyes with tears I didn't even try to hide. Maybe I didn't teach you, I said. Maybe I just reminded you who you really were. That night after she went to bed, I sat on the porch again, alone but not lonely. The stars stretched above me like an old promise kept. And I spoke softly to the night. Robert, I whispered, our daughter finally found herself. She's strong, she's kind, and she's happy. For a long moment there was only silence, until the wind rustled through the garden, carrying the scent of the sea and the faint sound of laughter. I smiled. I know, my love, you told me she would be. A few days later, brought home a framed quote to hang above the fireplace. It read, "Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, it changes what it means." When I read it, I realized that was the story of our lives. The pain hadn't disappeared. It had just transformed from something that broke us into something that built us. That's the miracle of love. It turns endings into beginnings. It turns mistakes into lessons. It turns silence into understanding. Sometimes I think about that phone call, the one where she told me she sold my house. How her voice had been cold and distant, and how I had smiled anyway. Back then, I thought I was smiling to hide my pain. Now I realize I was smiling because deep down I already knew love would win in the end. Often says she doesn't know how to thank me. But I tell her she already has. Not with gifts or money or even words, but with the woman she's become. Every act of kindness she shows to others is a thank you whispered into the world. And maybe that's all any parent ever wants, not perfection but growth. Not repayment but understanding. We still visit the beach house every summer. It's no longer just ours. It's now part of the Foundation's retreat center, a safe place for women to rest and rebuild. The walls that once held family laughter now echo with new stories of hope, of healing, of women finding their strength again. Says that's what real legacy looks like. And I think she's right. One evening, as we stood by the shore, watching the sun melt into the sea, slipped her hand into mine. Mom, she said quietly, I know Dad's gone, but sometimes I feel like he's still here in every decision we make, in every life we touch. I smiled. He never left, sweetheart. He just moved into the parts of us that still love. We stood there hand in hand, as the sky turned gold and crimson, the waves whispering like they'd always known our story. And maybe they had. So if you're listening to this story tonight and someone you love has hurt you, remember this. You don't forgive them because they deserve it. You forgive them because you deserve peace. Because the moment you let go of the anger that's been holding you down, you don't lose power, you reclaim it. And when you choose love over resentment, even just once, you become the kind of person who can never truly lose again. Did you like my story? Tell me in the comments which moment touched you the most and where in the world you're listening from. Your words mean more than you think. If this story moved you, send a super thanks or share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. And remember, every ending can become a beginning if you write it with love.